Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios politics reporter Sophia Kai.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here today. Today is International Women's Day, and we have an incredible lineup of women who will share their perspectives on the progress made and the path forward for achieving greater gender equality. If you're following along virtually, you can join us at the hashtag Axios events. And with that, I'd love to introduce our first guest. She's been a trailblazer over 15 years in both chambers of Congress. From the great state of Hawaii, please welcome Senator Mazie Hirono.
Okay. Hey, good morning, everybody. Hi, Sophia.
Thank you so much for being
here. Thank you. Sit. Okay. Aloha, everyone.
Good morning. I'd love to start big picture.
Mm-hmm.
When your colleague, Senator Feinstein, first came to Washington, there were just 2 women in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a quarter of the women is female, a quarter of the Senate is female, and almost a quarter of the House. As well as we have 12 female governors. And I'd love to hear from you what you think has changed and what has stayed the same.
Well, the numbers certainly have changed. However, I think that we still have what I would call gender oppression and racial oppression in our country, especially after the Dobbs decision. How can you not describe the situation as gender oppression when women and girls in our country have fewer rights than they did 50 years ago? And in fact, abortion was one of the first issues that I wrote a letter to my congressional delegation asking them what their views were on abortion, because Hawaii is the first state in the country to decriminalize abortion before Roe v. Wade. And so I was very, very politically active in college and protesting the war. But we have a ways to go because we still do not have what I would consider gender equity. And it's one of the reasons that a number of us is supporting the ERA and eliminating the time frame so that it can be deemed ratified.
So you're working on a lot. ERA is one of them, as well as abortion legislation. But if you had to pick one piece of legislation that could realistically pass this Congress, realistically,
that's the operative word.
What would it be? What would it be?
I don't necessarily look at realistically passing a legislation in this environment because, sad to say, I think we have a very divided country and we have MAGA Republicans, many of them are in the House, and so it's going to be pretty tough to get things like voting legislation and clearly, I would say the ERA, but that doesn't mean that we should not continue to push for this kind of legislation and put a marker down so that people in our country know what we're fighting for.
Let me bring you to last Congress, when you famously had this moment. It was during the Trump presidency where you walked up to the mics on the Hill and just went off on him. And so I'd love to know just at what moments are women allowed to be upset, allowed to be angry, and how do you pick those moments? What makes you upset now in 2023?
There are a lot of things that upset me. This is why I swear once in a while, because I say, with everything that's going on, if you're not moved to swearing once in a while, you're not paying attention. What is the moment? The moment is when you decide that you're going to use your voice. I hate bullies, and therefore, you have to stand up to bullies. Pretty early on in the Trump presidency, it was very clear to me that this is a bully. And that particular day, there was a spray. That's what we refer to when all of the media people are there. And they usually are waiting just before I get into the judiciary hearing or something like that. And there was there was an upsetting thing that the President Trump at that time said, and I was very upset about it. And as I walked to the hearing, my comms director said, if you're still upset, why don't you just, you can say something. So I said, okay. And that's when I called him a liar. I think I'm the first senator to call President Trump a liar, a misogynist, and admit a sexual predator. And the only thing, go ahead, clap, yeah, free yourself. And I said the only thing that is going to save us from being attacked, because he will attack anybody who doesn't agree with him, is for him to resign. And I walked off, and that is when there were articles written about how I finally found my voice, which I have to say really pissed me off, because we all have voices. And what I did was use my voice. And in all the years that I've been in politics, I never thought of myself as being shy or retiring, but I just never had to be so noisy about being effective in the political arena. But the thing about getting upset, because there is a lot to be upset about, and people are very uncomfortable, you notice, with women who express anger, right? I don't know any woman who has not had that kind of reaction when we express anger. But well-placed anger is very valuable.
I want to get into some more of the nuance here, and as you know and as you read about, sexism and racism is not something that is owned exclusively by the right. Recently, Don Lemon's comments about Nikki Haley is one example of that. What do you think is the most frustrating thing that your party gets wrong in how they treat or they support women in leadership, women voting?
We have a lot more women in leadership in our party. That's one thing, but misogyny knows no party. And that is something that we women, I'm sure you have experienced it in the job that you do, is the gender bias. In Hawaii, where we have a lot of diversity, it was not so much racial issues that I faced, although that's an undercurrent wherever we go, but it was more the guys telling me I can't win a race, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. There are so many women, I don't know a single woman who has not experienced that kind of what I would call gender oppression. And a lot of times we don't even recognize it as such. But from the vantage of where I sit now, I first ran for office in 1980, before a lot of you were even born. And I have been plugging away ever since, and I have come to the conclusion, finally, that I experience a lot of gender oppression. And when women talk about it, then we are told, if you can't take it, why are you in politics? And there are a lot of these kinds of put-downs, and we just need to, in my view, use our voices. And I use my voice. One thing about that moment when I engaged with the spray was that there is no turning back, because I also said during the Kavanaugh hearings, all you men out there, just shut up and step up, do the right thing. And there were T-shirts and things, merch and everything, none of which I, got any part of, but people were moved to relate to that. We need to use our voices, all of us, not just women. There's a lot of things to fight for in our country.
When you talk about running for office here, I want to get into the mechanics of sort of, the official party dynamic and infrastructure. And I wonder if you would push the Senate campaign arm and the House campaign arm of the Democratic Party to prioritize women in those competitive primaries in 24, because this was something that, on the Republican side, Elise Stefanik, GOP chair, she distilled as a problem in 2018, and she called on the Republican counterparts, the Senate Leadership Fund and the same in the House, to prioritize Republican women in competitive primaries. I mean, what do you make of that? And would you call on the Democratic Party to do the same?
I personally very much support women running for office at every level. And we need to fill the pipeline, meaning that we should be paying attention to local races. That is something that Republicans have done for decades. I've watched them trying to load up school boards, for example, in Hawaii, and they've really paid attention, and the Democrats have not as much. And so I am always pushing for women, and we have more women in the Senate now than ever. I don't necessarily see any particular gender bias, but I would say that when we have viable women running for office, and that is not a top-down kind of an assessment that, oh, somebody is a viable candidate, but we particularly, I would agree with you that we can do more to support women who run for office, because it takes a lot, really, for a woman to decide that she is going to step up and run for a seat. And you don't just do it because you think it's a great idea. There are a lot of aspects to running for office that we need a lot more help. Those are organizations like Emily's List matters. The early money is really important. And then to literally take the risk to step up and run for office. It is not for everyone.
Yes.
It is not for the faint-hearted.
Yes, and those big organizations, their support matters.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about, Biden and his administration is one that you've pushed really hard on some issues, including putting diverse nominees and appointees in very senior positions. You've even drawn those red lines. Now we're more than 2 years in. What do you make of their work, both in this aspect as well as the broader picture of the legislation, how they've been implementing it?
Representation matters, and this is why Tammy Duckworth and I don't think of it as a red line, but we did make it very clear to President Biden that we'd like to see a lot more representation by women and minority women in the cabinet. And I pushed for Julie Su way back then as early on for Labor Secretary. And I can tell you all now that when the president made his State of the Union speech recently, and some of you may have seen me talking with him, and the first thing I said to him was not, "Great speech, Mr. President." What I said to him was, "Julie Su for Labor Secretary." And what I didn't know was that there was a spot mic that, focused, and some people could make out what I said. And when one of my friends sent me the video of it, I heard a lot of ambient noise, and I said to him, "Are you reading lips now?" But you can make it out. And so I'm really glad that the president made the right choice in selecting Julie to be the Labor Secretary, but it's just a lot of incremental attention to be paid in this way to make sure that diversity is not something that frightens us. It does frighten the Republicans, I can tell you that.
You think so?
Yes, I know so. So President Biden's picks for the judiciary, for example, we've gotten over 100 now. People for the judiciary, and the majority of them are women. A lot of them are minority women with a lot of different kind of backgrounds, and that diversity is so much in contrast to what we saw during the Trump years. And really, the kind of people that sit on the judiciary for life makes a difference, because look at what's happening in Texas, where we're waiting for one judge, a Trump appointed judge, to make a decision on whether or not he will not have mifepristone, available across the country, and he can enjoy the availability of that drug, which is used in over 50% of the abortions in our country. And so it's bad enough that there are all these assaults. I call it assaults on a women's body autonomy, but now they're trying to even eliminate nationwide a widely used drug that's been approved by the FDA 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. A very big decision there. Would you support President Biden running for re-election in 2024?
If he runs for re-election, sure.
In that same vein, doesn't sound like a direct, we won't get into that.
He's going to make that decision, and if he runs, I will support him.
Who do you think will be the first female president of this country? Do you think, since
I thought it was going to be Hillary Clinton, but obviously that didn't happen.
and since you mentioned, the Republican field here, do you think the first female president will be a Democrat or a Republican?
I don't know because, as I said, we have a very divided country, and I don't think that we have a particularly female-supportive country because, look, we still don't have paid family leave. We don't have child care available and affordable. So there are a lot of things that the United States does not provide that supports women in the workplace and women in general. So we have a ways to go. And in fact, with the Dobbs decision, we're going to see a lot more maternal deaths. That is a fact. So there's nothing to be proud of that we should be at the top of the list of not having maternal deaths, but we are not there. And then the Dobbs decision will make it even worse. So there are just so many things that we need to be engaged in. And by the way, at the same time as the elections matter, we see voter suppression legislation being enacted all over.
It sounds like you're not that optimistic about, a female president.
But that doesn't mean that we're not going to fight back, though, because notice that there are so many women elected to the U.S. House now, and it gives me a lot of, I love watching them. They're very articulate. They fight back. And so many of them are minorities. We just need to do, in my view, a better job of electing much more diverse, group of people in the Senate. And really, when I first ran for the Senate in 2012, and I said to a group of people similar to this, I said, well, the Senate, look at the Senate, it needs a lot more diversity. And I said, I would bring quadruple diversity to the Senate because, one, I'm a woman. Two, I'm Asian. I would be the first Asian woman ever to be elected if I succeed. Three, I'm a Buddhist. I am the only Buddhist ever elected to the Senate. And I am an immigrant. I'm the only immigrant serving in the U.S. Senate right now. And somebody in the audience yelled out, yeah, but are you gay? And I said, nobody's perfect.
We have time for one last question, and I want to end with this. In your book, you write about the everyday moments, the small moments, the interactions that you take stock of, and they may be comments, you might not address them. But if there's one thing for our audience here and virtually to take away on International Women's Day about how we interact with each other, how we treat each other on a day-to-day, what would that be?
To be much more supportive of each other, I would say. But let me just say that you mentioned my book, and it's called The Heart of Fire, and it is a tribute to my mother, who changed my life by bringing me to this country. She displayed a heart of fire, so much courage. And so over time, if you don't mind, there are 4 life lessons that I've taken after all these years of being in the public arena. And I'm really grateful to be able to do what I do and fight the battles that I fight. But one person can make a difference because my mother changed my life by bringing me to this country. The second is, half the battle is showing up because the battles we thought we had won, whether it's women's right to make her own bodily decisions, voting rights, all of that, half the battle is showing up because we have to stay the course. The battles we thought we had won don't stay won. And the third is to take risks. And my mother showed me what it looks like to take a risk and to get out of your comfort zone. And that's what I've sought to do. And so it's never any one thing that I would say, but it's a number of things and truly to use your voices because we all have stories to tell.
I would love to continue our conversation, but we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Aloha, everybody. Okay, well.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios' Chief People Officer, Chen Gao.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to convey a huge thank you to our sponsor, Bank of America, for making this event and all of our News Shaper events possible. Without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage Sherry Bronstein, Chief Human Resources Officer at Bank of America. Sherry, welcome to Axios.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sherry, we're so excited to have you here on International Women's Day. As the CHRO of a large company, can you share with us your perspective on why women's leadership is so important?
Yeah, thank you, Chen. Thank you so much for having me today. And I don't want to start with a really simple concept, but we are half the world. I mean, just in case anybody missed that. And so we're customers, we're voters, we're employees, we're making purchasing decisions, we're parents, we're clients and investors. And we've got to make sure that we are really bringing the power of half of our population, and as Senator Hirona just talked about, that our voice is heard and that we are representing the world that we live in all of those different roles that we're playing. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, from a corporation perspective, we are half the talent base. And, Brian said once in an interview, if I was picking a basketball team, would I pick from half the population? You want to have the best talent. And so as companies, we need to recruit, develop, we need to retain women talent at all levels of the organization, and we need to have, the broadest sense of diversity. And the reality is companies with more women representation have proven to be more successful. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that, again, we're embracing this talent, and that we're making sure that that we're driving women and appealing to women in all aspects of business. When we think about, obviously, out in companies in less developed countries, that means access to basic needs, whether it's food, water, jobs, and here in developed countries, it's about Senator Hirona just talked about, it's about childcare and making sure, again, that's affordable, and that we can make sure, again, that we're bringing women into the workforce. This morning we just put out a piece in the Bank of America Institute that talked about one of the reasons we're seeing lower women labor force participation is really the cost and issues of access of childcare. And so that's something we've spent a lot of time on at the bank. And I guess, just to wrap up this question, I am optimistic because with a great leader under Brian's leadership, we've made great progress. We have over 40% women in our top couple levels. We have 5 women on our board. And so we can do this. And we've just got to stay at it every day to make progress.
Yeah, and I know that Bank of America is very focused on women entrepreneurship. Can you tell us a little bit about why that is a focus for the bank and what is the impact that you've been making there?
Yeah. As I said, women make up such a big part of the economy. If we don't embrace women, the gender gap costs the economy nearly 15% of GDP, it's been estimated. And so the programs that we invest in are really meant to empower women, small businesses, women clients, women entrepreneurs. And we work with a lot of partners. So just a couple examples through the Tory Burch Foundation and Bank of America Capital Program. We've enabled $95 million in affordable loans to over 5,000 U.S. women entrepreneurs to help grow their business. That's one program. We've also partnered with Cornell University, and we've provided free online education so that women can get a certificate in women's entrepreneurship. Again, creating, encouraging women to start new businesses and to be a critical part of the growth of the economy. And then just here in DC, we've been one of the first supporters of Vital Voices through the Global Ambassadors Program, which is we've supported more than 350 women from 85 countries, helping them grow their business and organizations. And just today, we've announced the Bank of America Marketplace by Seneca Women, which is an online marketplace. I'd really encourage everyone to take a look at it. We already have 100 women small business owners. We just had a little a program last night where at an offsite we were able to shop and support these women from all over the country that have these incredible businesses, and so would encourage everybody to get out in the marketplace. But at the end of the day, we need women to succeed. They provide jobs. They help us grow the economy, and what's good for business is good for women, and vice versa.
Yeah, I love hearing what you're doing externally, and I also would love to hear a little bit about what you're doing within Bank of America. I'm looking at my notes because I have here that Bank of America has more than 100,000 women employees. What trends are you seeing regarding women in leadership at the bank? Where are you and your team focusing your efforts?
Yeah, so this is not a new thing for us at the bank. Being a great place to work is critical to us delivering for all of our stakeholders. And so under Brian's leadership, we've continued to be really focused on diversity and inclusion. Again, Senator Hirona talked about representation matters, and it does. So 100,000 women, about 50% of our workforce are women globally, 42% in our top couple levels. As I mentioned before, 5 women on our board. And the reality is, up and down our organization and across, we have women in representation. And like any other measure, we measure, we have accountability, and we continue to grow our women leadership through many different programs, whether it's a women's sponsorship program. We have our campus recruiting, where we bring women in at the entry level and continue to develop and grow them through the organization. But at the end of the day, we each are accountable on the management team to continue to make progress. So I think, one, we measure it, we analyze, we understand where women are joining, where they might be leaving, and we address those issues. Secondly, we really think a lot about benefits. We have 16-week paid parental leave, and one of the things we're the most proud of, 50% of those parental leaves are taken by men, and that's really important when you think about equality. We've worked really hard to make sure that it's not just women that are taking those leaves, but men that are taking those leaves. We also just launched a sabbatical program. That's for our long-tenured employees, where we think we're one of the biggest companies to ever do that at scale. And this recognizes long-tenured employees, but we do see so far about 60% of the people taking sabbaticals are women. And it's just a much-needed break, 4 to 5 weeks after 15 years of being with us. And we're really seeing people taking that time to invest in themselves, emotional wellness, physical wellness, or caretaking responsibilities, and so we're really proud to offer that. And then we've been really focused on mental health and again, caretaking responsibilities. We've got 50 days of child care, 50 days of elder care backup. So, almost 100 days a year that people can lean into our benefits to provide the care. We also subsidize child care for teammates that are below $100,000 and make child care much more affordable. So we really thought about the suite of benefits that we need to support all of our parents and caregivers. And as we know, more of the caretaking responsibilities fall to women. And then just to wrap that up, we've invested in what we call Life Event Services, which is a team of about 200 HR professionals that are there in the moments that matter. And that can be everything from supporting a teammate who is going through domestic violence, to supporting a trailing spouse through military service, to how do we deploy help to our teammates, obviously through the pandemic, on all aspects of the pandemic, but in a hurricane or whatever may be going on. And it's something that we talk about, a culture of caring for our teammates, and it really matters. And honestly, we've seen attrition for our women be actually below men for the last 4 years. And we're really proud of that, even at a time when we've seen women leaving the workforce.
Wow, that's great. I mean, just hearing about how you're able to do all of these programs and also at scale is really, really impressive. I think we're so happy to be able to have this conversation on International Women's Day. It's early in the day, so tell me, what else do you have in store for you for International Women's Day here in DC today?
Yeah, thanks. Like I said, I want to leave on a note of optimism, because I am optimistic. I know we can do this when we put our hearts and souls into this. and just keep measuring and making progress. But I am here today for the board meeting of the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. And as you know, the museum's going to get built, and we're very excited about it and thrilled to be spending time with my colleagues on the board. And we're even more excited for when the museum gets built and we'll be able to show both our sons and our daughters and all women about the history of women in our great country. Thank you.
Great.
Please give a warm welcome to the stage Axios communications strategist and writer Eleanor Hawkins.
Hi, good morning. It's really great to see you all here. I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm even more excited to welcome our next guest. She's a true trailblazer and the current co-host, co-anchor of PBS NewsHour. Please join me in welcoming Amna Nawaz.
Thanks for having
Thank you. All right, good morning, Amna.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I have to tell you, when I was reading through your bio, I was shocked by all of the firsts that were in it. First generation American, first Muslim American to moderate a presidential debate, and to now co-anchor a national broadcast. Talk to me a little bit about your career path up until this point.
It's wild, right? That in 2023, we're still having these kinds of firsts. I think that's what strikes me more than anything is when you learn about these things over the course of your career, because of course you never set out to be the first. That would be a ridiculous goal. You just set out to be the best that you can be. And each time I've hit one of those things, it's been this combination of incredible honor, right? It's humbling to be able to know that no one like you has been in these roles before. But it's also a little bit outrageous that it's taken as long as it has, because it's not that there's been a shortage of qualified candidates who could have been in these roles for years before, but it's just taken this long because of a number of institutional factors. So I know I'm here in these roles and I've been able to do the things I've been able to do because of the generations of women who came before me, women of color and first generation women and so on. And now I feel like my job, in addition to being the best journalist I can be, is to make sure that the door I walk through stays open for more people behind me.
You mentioned the women before you. There was Judy Woodruff, there was Gwen Ifill, iconic female journalists.
Yeah.
How do you think about that as you take on this role? And then maybe what are some things that you're hoping to do a little bit differently now that you own the seat?
I mean, first and foremost, there's nothing but gratitude for all of these women whose experiences, you know, I've heard anecdotally women who've taken the time to mentor me and to guide me along my career path. On NBC first, Ann Curry was an incredible influence for me. I had a number of female producers who lifted me up and gave me opportunities. Similarly at ABC, Martha Raddatz was a wonderful influence. Judy, as soon as I came to the PBS NewsHour, has been an incredible mentor and guide for me. I will never fully understand what they went through in their careers to get where they got, and I'm so incredibly grateful for it. But now I think it's not just about doing things differently. Journalism is inherently different today than it was when they began their careers. It's different than when I began my career. You know, I started in 2001 in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. It was my very first internship, my very first foray into journalism. And we're a different country today. Journalism is a different industry today. I couldn't have imagined we'd be reporting in the many ways that we are. I wouldn't have imagined we would have a TikTok account 20 years ago. But here we are, you know, and I think we're in such a crowded and messy, noisy news and information landscape. Disinformation and misinformation forces are very, very real. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are putting more good journalism out there in whatever way we can, on whatever platforms we can, and meeting our audience where they are. So that's how I see our mission today.
Yeah, you're right. PBS on TikTok is something that's a little surprising, but exciting.
I think
You're meeting
so.
audiences where they are. I think another thing I want to touch on that you probably weren't expecting to do was to do a live broadcast from your home, which you did
Nope.
for how many months during the COVID shutdown?
Did it for the better part of a year.
Wow.
Yeah. We had a home studio set up in my basement, and I have 2 young children and a very loud dog.
So what was that like? How did that change the way that you think about maybe being a working mom, being a working parent?
You know, it's always been a tough balance. I was still a foreign correspondent when I had my first daughter, still doing war zones, and I remember the feeling of being pregnant, interviewing this military commander on this embed, on this mountaintop post that we'd hike to, feeling really, really awful. And just thinking, like, the flak jacket fit weird, and I thought, I don't know how long I can do this. So the collision of what I want and need in my personal life versus where my career was headed happened very early for me. And I think women all over feel this, right? You're constantly kind of trying to figure out where that balance is. Throughout my career, though, those same pressures that everyone feels, I have felt and dealt with. You never feel like you're fully present anywhere, and you never feel like you're fully succeeding on either front. When you're at work, you're thinking about what you should be doing for your kids, and when you're with your kids, you're thinking about what you should be doing for work. I will say I have the benefit of having made the best decision I ever made was to marry the best man I've ever met. His name is Paul. He's been an incredible partner for me, an incredible father to our girls. When I took the job with PBS 4 years ago, he left his job at the New York Times and became a full-time parent to our 2 girls so that I could lean into this job. I will take applause for him, absolutely. So, but that too is a decision of privilege. We have options. We can think about these kinds of things and make decisions that work for us. And I think that makes me even more dedicated to report on these things because I know most people don't have those kinds of options.
I want to talk a little bit about your reporting and just your background and being a mother, being a woman. How does that inform the way that you cover certain topics?
It's everything. Yeah. I mean, we don't check who we are at the door when we show up to do our jobs as journalists, right? No one ever has. And I think the difference today is there are more voices and more different perspectives in the conversation. So when I show up to do a story, I am always thinking about who's not in the room, who's not here to ask questions, who am I asking questions and seeking answers on behalf of. And for a long time, a lot of these perspectives, in particular, issues that matter to women, issues that matter to people of color, issues that matter to marginalized or vulnerable communities, they were not the first questions that were asked, in particular of people in positions of power. So I think when I show up at work, I'm there with my full self. I am. And that's not to say that it influences how I report, but it absolutely informs how I do my job. Because I think the issues that matter to me and the people that I know and the questions that I have are questions that millions of other people out there have. So when I showed up, for example, at Uvalde for the mass shooting, those kids were the same age as my eldest daughter. And I'd be lying if I told you I didn't see my daughter's face in every single one of their faces. And when I talked to the kids, and we talked to dozens of people off camera who never ended up in any of our reports just because I needed to feel that connection with the kids. I needed to talk to them and get their perspective and hear their stories. And that absolutely informed the questions that I asked of people in positions of power there. It informed how I walked into people's homes. It informed how I talked to those kids and the questions I asked them. I don't know that I would have done it that way if I hadn't lived the life that I have until now.
Another topic you've reported extensively on is the child care crisis. Talk to me about that. I feel like it's very rare for a news organization to dedicate an hour of prime time on a topic like this. So how did you A, get PBS's buy-in, and B, how did you think about covering that really dense and surprisingly controversial topic of childcare?
I mean, first of all, just the phrase, like child care crisis, right? It is a very real crisis. It's an impossible choice for millions and millions of Americans. Getting buy-in was not the hard part. I will say at PBS and in the NewsHour in particular, We really thrive on tackling some of these tough topics when it comes to healthcare or incarceration or plastic pollution, which is another documentary I did, or childcare. We had an incredible team of reporters and producers who'd long been reporting on this anyway when we decided to turn it into a full primetime documentary. But it's impossible. And it's one of those things we constantly report on, right? Every time, certainly during the pandemic, it was revealed just how incredibly impossible a situation it is. When we decided to pull it together, we said we're going to take a deeper look at this because it needs a deeper look. And we have the benefit of being able to do that at the NewsHour. So it's those kinds of opportunities, I think, that set us apart in many ways because it's not fixed. It needs attention. We went back in history and saw places in time where Congress has stepped in, for example. I did not know this. Congress stepped in and provided federally funded child care centers for millions of Americans at times that they deemed a crisis in the past. They're not doing that now. Child care is completely unaffordable. We do not support working parents in this country. And it's a real problem for millions of people. So I think through this work, what we're trying to do is not just explore what's wrong and highlight the many problems and challenges people face, but also try to look at what are possible solutions. Like, how can we fix this?
What are some other topics, issues that you're paying close attention to on behalf of, the people like you?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. There's so many. I mean, this is the benefit of being a journalist today is it's a really awful time in a lot of ways. There's so many stories that need telling, and it's really the best time ever to be a journalist because there are so many stories that need telling. I have a really wide range of interests. I cover politics, I've covered the White House, I've covered foreign affairs and war and conflict and unrest overseas. I've covered childcare, I've covered climate, I've covered healthcare, immigration, sports. I love covering sports too. I think bringing that wide range of interests to the work that I do is important because I think our audience also has that same range of interests. Think about everyone's daily life. No one's just paying attention to any one thing. But we do have at PBS a really deep connection to our audience. We really pride ourselves on being close to the communities that we serve. And so every day we're really thinking about what's top of people's minds today. Like, what questions do people need answered today? And in times of elections, it's kind of easier to focus in on some of those top issues. People tell you what they're worried about, right? I'm worried about the economy. I'm worried about crime. I'm worried about education. But day to day, there's any number of topics that come up from our incredible team of reporters and producers and journalists, just in terms of what's coming up in their circles. What do they care about? That's how we arrive at the show every day.
I want to zoom in on your team. I think PBS is super unique because leadership is pretty much full of powerful women.
That's right.
The CEO of PBS, the CEO of WIDA, your executive producer is a woman. What's that like, working in a place that's so female?
So I've been a journalist 20 years now, and this is the first time the entire leadership I've worked for is women. So yes, our executive producer, Sarah Just, the head of WETA is Sharon Rockefeller, the head of PBS is Paula Kerger. It is both amazing and inspiring and also should be wholly unremarkable at the same time, right? Because they are who they are because they're incredible at what they do. And we are now the most trusted brand in news because of their leadership and because of the team that we have. And I think the two are connected. So, I'm incredibly proud to be able to say that I work for that kind of leadership team. And maybe it's something we should see more often.
You mentioned several mentors that you've had throughout your career. What's the best piece of advice that you've gotten and who gave it to you?
Oh, there's so many, so many. I do remember being on a foreign trip once for breaking news overseas with Ann Curry back when I was producing. And she at the time had 2 young children. I couldn't even imagine what a life would look like with children, right? Because you just have no idea how your entire world changes when you become a parent. And I remember she said to me, the best you can do, you're always going to feel like you're being pulled in different directions. And the best you can ever do is just try to be present. This work and this life is all about peaks and valleys. You have to be able to sustain yourself in the valleys and have what it takes to get over the peaks. But if you are present wherever you are, when you're at work and you're giving it your all. When you're with your family or your friends, you're with them and you're giving it your all. That is That is how you get through this. And I can't say that I always succeed. I am guilty of checking my phone too many times on the weekends sometimes, but it's a North Star, I think, that helps me get through the days.
At Axios, we like to end on one fun thing. So I'd love for you to maybe give us a sneak peek at what we can expect from your NewsHour broadcast later this evening.
Sure. So caveat, of course, that the show is constantly changing over the course of the day. We are live at 6 o'clock Eastern, and sometimes at 5:59 we are making show changes. So that in mind. I know today we have a few things planned. There are a couple big hearings on Capitol Hill about global threats. I know we're going to cover that. I think we're going to go deeper into some of the intelligence we've gotten on the COVID origin story as well today. I recently did an interview with Malala Yousafzai and director Joshua Seftel about a new documentary film they have that will be, actually it's nominated for an Oscar, so I think that conversation will be on tonight. I think we're also going to take a look at the Senate vote on the DC crime bill. We've been following weather on the West Coast because California needs help, and we'll see what else comes up. That's how we spend our day.
No shortage of news.
No shortage.
To say the least. Well, Amna, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Please welcome to the stage Axios economics reporter Courtney Brown.
Wow. What a welcome. Thank you. Good morning. So for our final segment, we're going to go across the Atlantic, sort of. I want to ask you to help me welcome the German ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Emily Haber. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador. I want to note that if we were in Berlin right now, all of us would have the day off for International Women's Day. It became a public holiday in 2019. Why do you think that was important for Berlin to officially make it a public holiday?
First of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for making this conversation possible. It's only a holiday in Berlin and in another federal state of Germany, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. In all of the other 14 federal states, it's not a holiday. So when the holiday was introduced by the then coalition in Berlin, it was for obvious political reasons, to make it a day of awareness, to make it a day where anti-discrimination was in the focus. There are going to be a lot of demonstrations in Berlin on this day. There's also a pushback, in all fairness. I saw it on Twitter this morning, and it was pretty tough.
Yeah.
But I guess making it a holiday has a triggering effect in very good ways and also sometimes in bad ways.
What are the bad ways?
Well, the bad ways are the pushback with tones on Twitter that you can easily imagine.
Yeah, yeah. So Germany's foreign minister, who I believe is the first woman to hold the position ever, this year put forward a plan for the country's government to pursue feminist foreign policy. So what does that mean, and why does that matter?
It was actually part of the coalition agreement. We have this habit in Germany to conclude an agreement between the parties that enter government. It's like an international treaty, looks like it anyway. And it's very long usually, and feminist foreign policy is a part of it. There was a discussion whether to call it feminist foreign policy because it is about women, but it's also about other groups, marginalized groups. It's just to widen the focus. Perhaps let me explain it this way, because many critics claim or frame it in a way as if this was only about the personal advancement of career women. And that's a tiny fraction of it. What it is about is to introduce the set of experiences and the prisms that women bring to the table. Let me give you one example, and that was, I thought, very impressive. The foreign minister traveled to Ukraine, and someone in one of the conversations said to her, well, rapes happen in all wars. That's just it. And she said, yeah, but then let's make sure that this is a war crime, and let's make sure that we adopt legislation that will provide accountability. That's what it is about, to widen the prisms that we have and to specifically introduce the set of experiences and prisms and vantage points of women and of others that feel either discriminated or marginalized.
Are there policies that Germany has pursued in recent years that would not fit in to this feminist foreign policy idea? And what are those?
You're talking about a domestic
Sure,
condition.
yes.
Well, you would be right to point to the significant gender pay gap that still exists in Germany. It was even surprising to me to see that in the European comparison, Germany is at the lower end. The aggregate pay gap, gender pay gap, is actually 18%, and that's significant. If you compare, it's got a number of reasons. I'll come to them. But if you compare comparable qualifications and professions, it's much lower, but it's still significant. It's at 7%. There are a number of reasons for that, and it's larger, by the way, in Western Germany than in the Eastern German federal states that come with a different tradition of women in the labor market. It's got the reasons are manifold. Partly because the professional choices of women are still specific jobs that are less well paid than other jobs. Women often don't reach leadership positions and so forth. That's why the previous coalition in Germany had adopted legislation that would made it mandatory for companies of a larger size to first provide transparency about the way they pay women and men, and second, introduce mandatory reporting about the payment traditions in these companies. This legislation is now under review. The first review already happened. There's a second review because it does not seem to be significant as the numbers would evidence. There's also European legislation which is substantially more strict on reporting, mandatory reporting and remedy measures for correcting the pay gap. And once that is adopted by the European Parliament, it will have to be introduced into national legislation as well. So things are on the move, but if you, as we do, pursue a feminist foreign policy, you better be nationally a role model too. So I think that is the direction we'll have to take.
Right, just to give folks some context, I believe Germany has the fourth widest pay gap, at least as of 2021, out of all of EU member countries. Mm-hmm. But that's not to say there hasn't been progress, right? The pay gap is quite large, as you mentioned, but it has come down in the last decade or so. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what type of policies do you see needing to be implemented besides the ones you just mentioned around pay transparency that will help, close that gap further?
Well, first of all, the European legislation will make pay gaps much more difficult. Right. But then you're right to say there are other measures that are necessary as well, and that is childcare facilities, for example. Many women have problems taking up jobs because of deficits in the childcare landscape in Germany. There are other issues like share of domestic work in the households. There is the issue of life and professional balance. And all of that is part of the picture if we want to change the if we want to change gaps or lopsided situations that affect women and their prospects.
Who do you see as responsible for helping to fix some of the issues you just mentioned, childcare, work-life balance? Is that on the government or is that on the private sector, corporations?
I guess it's all layers of government. I think it's all layers of society, I meant. Obviously, it's government, it's parliament, legislation is both. It's society at large, it's public awareness, and that affects individuals as well as NGOs. It affects companies, it affects company cultures, all of the above.
Right, right. I want to go back to this idea of feminist foreign policy. Germany is not the first to pursue this idea. Do you think it takes a woman in that position to implement these sorts of policies? Let me ask it a different way. If the foreign minister of Germany was not a woman, if it were a man, would Germany be pursuing these policies?
I would hope so, because you see, working against discrimination of women or of other groups is not a woman's business. It's the business of society at large. It's the business of each and every one of us. So making it a woman's issue is allowing, if we frame it as something only a woman could do, we dismiss men from their responsibility for equality in society. So I would hope a man would have introduced feminist foreign policy as designed to work against discrimination and marginalization in society. I would hope that men or women would consider their business.
Germany is the largest economy in the EU, as people may know. How do you see some of the gender inequality that persists in Germany as having an economic impact in your country?
I'd say the impact has been and could be that we simply lose the potential that women bring to the table, that women bring to the economy. If women don't seek jobs that are typically, in Germany at least, still men's jobs, the society loses potential. So focusing on closing the gap will also open up a potential that has been underused so far.
And feminist foreign policy, we talked about some of the domestic initiatives that come along with that, but what about kind of helping close the gender pay gap globally? How would feminist foreign policy help in that context, or would it?
Well, feminist foreign policy is not about lecturing other countries what to do, because we won't be able to. But what we can do is ask the right questions, try to be more of a role model domestically, showing the potential, the positive potential for economy and society if that happens, and changing framing habits that exist in all societies. I guess it's very much about awareness. There's also another element to it, and we haven't mentioned that so far. Part of the feminist foreign policy is focusing on project that introduce the element of gender budgeting. Every project that we support or the development ministry would be like USAID pursues has to look into the effects on gender and diversity. 85% of that will be gender budgeted, and 7% or 8% of the financial means that go into these projects will have to actually focus on changing the balance. So gender budgeting is an important element for international projects and for international efforts as well.
I want to ask you maybe for some advice for some of your US counterparts. Are there policies that you see Germany having that the US could or should model to help with its own gender inequity issues?
I think we should be having a conversation. There's a conversation to be had on how to do it, but I wouldn't give any advice or wouldn't, as I said before, lecture anyone. We all come from our specific vantage points, experiences, societal and political traditions, and whatever we do will have to fit into it. But as we pursue the same objectives, which means equality and fighting discrimination and fighting gender gaps, we'll have to have the conversation on how best to do it. There's not one single panacea to move ahead.
Here in the U.S., gender inequity has always been top of mind for activists, for women, various parts of the population. But during the pandemic, it really became clear how much of a problem this was, and it had an economic impact. Women were less likely to rejoin the workforce because they were having childcare issues. That held back the labor force recovery. Was that the case in Germany too?
Yes.
Did the pandemic? Yeah, can you talk about that?
It was perhaps somewhat to a lesser extent because we had cushioned off the effects of the pandemic by the government had. By continuing to pay people in the workforce or pay the companies to be able to not dismiss people from the workforce. And that sort of provided more security for women as well. But the other effects you've mentioned, the effects on really bearing the brunt of the domestic work, there was the issue of violence against women, which rose significantly during the pandemic. So I think what the pandemic really brought home was the realization that security, economic and personal security for women is more fragile than we probably have expected previously, and that's important to remember. Even if we secure progress, progress seems to be standing on thinner ice, which has been really disclosed by when the pandemic hit hard. So in situations of crisis, women will be more vulnerable than men. That's one of the lessons of the pandemic.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining Axios. Before you all go, one final thanks to our audience for attending in person and virtually. Feel free to stick around and network until the next Axios Newshapers event. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.